things like Facebook, like social media, can become more than just a means to communicate and interact with each other, we begin to realize the profound influence that it has in our lives. So the development of the social medias and of the internet in general has created an unprecedented change of social transformation. So I want to talk a little bit about myself. About a couple years ago, you could have found me living here in YQ Valley. And, I didn't have internet connection, didn't watch TV, lived off of solar. And so life was very simple. But from this perspective, I was really able to see how much the internet and social media in general influence the way that we live our lives, especially here at school, being college students. I don't know if you guys know this, but a good majority of college students, almost 100%, are all connected to the internet. So I want to talk today about three things. And the first is why the internet has become so influential in our lives, how this will affect us, possibly, and also who this really relates to the most profoundly. Okay, so it begins in the 1500s with the creation of this. Does anyone know what this is?
Cotton gin.
Cotton gin? Actually, this is a picture of the printing press. It's a little small stuff in the corner there. And so what happened with this is all of a sudden, as an individual, you could spread a message to a wide range of people by printing this written word. But the problem with that was you could get your message out to a bunch of people, but you couldn't really get anything back. These people were reading your book, but they didn't know who you were. They probably never met you. And they didn't have very much means to interact with the novelist himself. So, 1800s, we have this, the telegraph and the telephone. So what this did is it enabled people to interact over a distance. You could call somebody, you could telegraph somebody. The military used this, governments used this. It was, at the time, a very reasonable means of communication. But unlike the printing press, with a telephone, you just had one-to-one communication. You couldn't get a message out to people. You just could talk to the person that you were talking to, basically. Now, in the 1900s here, we discovered and learned how to manipulate radio waves. Now this broadcasts the signal. And so now, all of a sudden, our means of communication is not limited to a cable link. But then, something else happened. The internet. And what that did was this. It took all of that and it put it into one package. So now you can interact with individuals, you can send a broad message, and you can do that globally, all at the same time. Okay, so this is Tim Berners-Lee. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he actually is credited with writing the code for the World Wide Web, writing the first initial code for the World Wide Web. Okay, and so in one of his conferences that he holds, he said this about the issue of intellectual property. That society as a whole has complex issues to face here, and that is private ownership versus open source. And so I'm going to come back to that. Just remember what he said. And so now this is where we get to a very interesting situation, because the internet allows people to communicate. I mean freely. If you want internet connection to your house, you have to pay for it. But being a student, you can just log in for free, and there are a lot of places where you can just go and get free wireless. So basically, you're like connected to the world, and it's almost free. It's a very accessible resource for us. But here we have China, and so this is a map showing the effect of the Sichuan 2008 earthquake, and all the dotted areas there are the areas of China and around China which were affected, and of course the red area, the red dots there are the areas that were affected the most. These are just some photos of what is actually happening there. And so the interesting thing about this situation here is, first, when this earthquake was happening, the first response that the world had heard about it was not from the news, not from the United States Geological Survey. It was from Twitter. The world learned about this event through social media. And secondly, in the aftermath of this event, there was information leading to the belief that government corruption had led to insufficient architecture, and also which caused the collapse of school buildings, which was a very big issue with this earthquake. And so now, I want to quote the New York Times. And so the New York Times quoted that internet censorship in China is amongst the most stringent in the world. Interestingly enough, after this event, China banned Twitter, which in the long run was kind of irrelevant because Chinese made their own form of Twitter. But so, what happened after this earthquake was, in the light of this government corruption being exposed, the Chinese people, they protested and they broadcast that on the internet. Now China, because of its history with the Great Wall, I'm sure you guys all know about the Great Wall, so we say, because of its internet censorship, that there is a great firewall of China. And so what this does is, as you can see here, they limit what's coming in. But what they didn't anticipate was that this time, what they wanted to stop what was going out is what was going out. And that was what was being sent by Chinese citizens. And so there was a lot of media coverage about this event. And it really showed the world what was happening. And China, despite all of its internet control, could not stop it. And this is something that you and I, people like you and I, were doing in China. So now, that comes to my last point, which is, who does this affect? And if you guys look at this graph, it may be a little bit small from where you're sitting, but let me just explain to you what's happening. And if you see, this is a map of internet connectivity throughout the world. And in the center there, with that big yellow circle and all the yellow lanes going through it, that's the United States. That's us. So we are considered the internet superpower. And you can see statistically that is reasonably a safe assumption. And here we have a graph of internet usage done by the Pew Internet Research Facility. And it shows by age group what the internet percent usage is. And at the top there, that's generally going to be our age group, 18 to 29. So in the US, we are the internet superpowers, and as college students, generally from our generation, considered the information age, we are the number one users, period. And so the internet has created social transformation, and the internet content is not easily controllable. We can't stop it. It's going to continue to happen, and the internet is going to continue to grow. So what we have to ask ourselves is, how are we going to choose to integrate this into our lives? Thank you.